The banging on my door did not sound like a knock. It sounded like someone trying to break it down without wanting to break it down, if that makes any sense. 3 fast hits, then silence, then 3 more. I froze on my couch with the television remote still in my hand. It was almost midnight. Nobody knocked on my door at midnight, not in this building, not on this street. My name is Ryan Carter, and up until that night, the strangest thing that had ever happened to me was a raccoon getting into my kitchen through a window I forgot to close. I walked to the door slowly, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 women standing under the hallway light, so close together that their shoulders touched. They were not looking at each other. They were both looking straight at the door, as if they already knew I was watching them through the tiny glass circle. My hand hovered over the lock. Something about the way they stood there felt wrong, though I could not explain what. It was not fear exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when a photograph has been edited just slightly, and you cannot point to what changed, but you know it has. I opened the door anyway. They were twins, identical in every visible way. Same height, same face, same dark hair falling straight to their shoulders. They wore plain gray clothing that looked like it belonged in a hospital, simple and without any buttons or zippers that I could see. Their eyes were the strangest part. Too dark, almost black, with no clear line between the colored part and the black center. "We need shelter until morning," the one on the left said. "Only until morning," the one on the right said, a half second after her sister, as if finishing the same sentence from 2 mouths. I should have shut the door right there. Any sensible person would have. But there was something in their voices, a kind of exhaustion that felt real, felt human, even if everything else about them did not. And there was fear behind their eyes too, the kind you cannot fake. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping one hand on the doorframe, ready to close it if I needed to. "Travelers," the left one said. "We were separated from our transport." "It is very cold outside," the right one added, though I noticed she said it like a fact she had read somewhere, not like something she actually felt. I looked past them down the hallway. Empty. No cars outside my window that I had heard pull up, no footsteps before the knocking started. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building with a broken elevator, so anyone who came up here had to climb the stairs, and I would have heard that. "You're not from around here," I said. It was not really a question. The one on the left tilted her head very slightly. "No, we are not from around here." I do not know exactly why I stepped aside and let them in. Maybe it was late enough that my brain was not thinking clearly. Maybe some part of me wanted an adventure, even a small, strange one, after years of nothing happening in my life at all. Maybe I just felt sorry for them, the way you feel sorry for someone standing in the rain even before you know their story. They walked inside without looking around the way normal guests do. They did not glance at my furniture, or my bookshelf, or the mess of dishes I had left in the sink. They stood in the middle of my living room, close together, and waited, like they were used to waiting for instructions. "I'm Ryan," I said, closing the door behind them and locking it, more out of habit than any real belief that a lock would keep anything out that wanted in. "I am called Elena," the one on the left said. "I am called Nora," said the one on the right. The names sounded almost too simple, too plain, like something picked quickly off a list rather than names they had grown up with. But I did not push the point. Not yet. "You can sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. They sat down together, at the exact same moment, in the exact same way, back straight, hands folded in their laps. It was the kind of thing you would notice in a movie and think was a clever detail. In real life, sitting 3 feet away from it, it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Are you hungry?" I asked. Because that is the thing you ask guests, even guests you are not sure are entirely human. "We do not require food in the way you do," Elena said. "But it would be polite to accept," Nora added. And for the first time, one corner of her mouth moved, almost like the beginning of a smile that she was not quite sure how to finish. I went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, mostly because I needed a minute away from them to think. My hands were shaking slightly as I filled the glasses. I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. Nothing unusual. A parked car, a street lamp flickering, the same view I had looked at 1,000 nights before. When I came back, they were both looking directly at me, not blinking. I set the glasses down on the table in front of them, and Elena picked hers up first, studying it before drinking, like she was testing whether the water was safe, or maybe like she had never actually held a glass before. "Thank you," she said, after a long pause, as if remembering that this was the correct thing to say. I sat down in the chair across from them, keeping the coffee table between us. "So," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt, "where exactly are you traveling from?" The sisters exchanged a look, the kind of look that passed between them so fast it was almost invisible. Nora spoke first this time. "It would be difficult for you to understand the location." "Try me," I said. "Very far," Elena said simply. "Farther than you have words for." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Part of me had already guessed it, from the moment I saw them in the hallway, but hearing it said out loud, even in such a careful, roundabout way, hit differently than the suspicion had. "You're not from Earth," I said. Neither of them denied it. Nora simply lowered her eyes to the water glass in her hands, and Elena kept her gaze steady on me, waiting to see what I would do next. Would I scream? Would I run? Would I call someone? I did none of those things. I just sat there, staring at two women who looked completely human except for their eyes, in my small apartment, at nearly midnight, and felt the strangest calm settle over me. Whatever was happening, it had already started. There was no undoing the door I had opened. "Why my apartment?" I asked. "Why here?" "We did not choose it," Elena said. "Not exactly." "Then how did you end up outside my door?" Nora looked up at me then, and for a moment, something passed behind those dark eyes that looked almost like grief. "We were running," she said quietly, and this was the first door that felt safe to try. I wanted to ask what they were running from. I wanted to ask 100 things at once, but before I could open my mouth, a sound came from outside, low and steady, like a hum that did not belong to any car engine or machine I had ever heard. Both sisters went rigid at the exact same instant, their heads turning toward the window in perfect unison. "They are close," Nora whispered. "Who is close?" I asked, my heart suddenly pounding. Elena turned back to me, and for the first time, her calm, careful expression cracked just slightly, showing something underneath that looked almost like real, human fear. "Please," she said, "we only need until morning." I looked toward the window, toward the sound still humming faintly somewhere out in the dark, and I realized that whatever I had let into my apartment that night, it was far bigger than two strange women needing a place to sleep. And there was no way, now, that I was simply going to sit back and watch how the rest of the night unfolded. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Until morning." Nora exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to release something she had been holding for a very long time. Elena reached over and took her sister's hand, and for just a moment, they looked less like strange visitors from somewhere beyond the stars, and more like two frightened people who had finally found a place to rest, even if only for a few hours. Outside, the humming sound faded, then disappeared entirely, swallowed by the ordinary night noise of the city. But I had a feeling, sitting there in my quiet living room with two impossible guests, that it would be back. And when it returned, I was not sure my apartment, or my ordinary life, would ever be the same again. I glanced at the clock on my wall. It was 12:15 in the morning. Sunrise was still hours away, and something told me those hours were going to be the longest of my life. "Get some rest if you can," I said, standing up. "I'll take the chair." "You do not have to give up your bed," Elena said. "I know," I said. "I'm choosing to." She studied me for a long moment, that strange, careful study that made me feel like I was being read rather than looked at. Then she nodded, just once, like she had decided something about me, filed it away for later. I walked to my bedroom to grab a blanket, and as I passed the window, I paused and looked out at the empty street below. Nothing moved, no lights, no cars, no sign that anything unusual had ever come near this quiet corner of the city. But I knew better now. I knew that just because something could not be seen did not mean it was not there, waiting, watching, getting closer with every silent minute that passed. And somewhere out in that darkness, whatever the sisters were running from was still searching for them. I grabbed the blanket and went back to the living room, where Elena and Nora sat close together on my couch, whispering to each other in a language that had no sound I recognized, words that seemed to come from somewhere between speech and silence. They stopped the moment they noticed me watching. "Everything all right?" I asked. "For now," Nora said. I settled into the chair across from them, pulling the blanket over my knees, and watched the two of them slowly close their eyes, though I was not sure they actually slept the way people do. I stayed awake, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, and underneath it all, straining my ears for any hint of that strange humming sound returning. It did not come back right away, but I knew, somehow, deep in my chest, that the night was far from over, and that morning, when it finally arrived, was going to look nothing like any morning I had woken up to before. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest. My eyes kept snapping open every time the building settled or a car passed outside, and every time I looked over at the couch to make sure the sisters were still there, still real, not some strange trick my tired mind had invented. They were awake too. Both of them sat with their eyes open, staring at nothing in particular, or maybe at something only they could see. Nora noticed me watching and turned her head toward me. "You do not need to guard us," she said. "I'm not guarding you," I said, though that was not entirely true. "I just can't sleep." "Because of us," Elena said. It was not a question. "Because of everything," I admitted. I got up and walked to the kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. I made a cup of tea I did not really want, just to have a task, a small piece of normal life to hold on to. When I came back, Nora was standing by my bookshelf, looking at the spines of the books without touching any of them. "You read a great deal," she said. "Some," I said, "not as much as I used to." She tilted her head at a worn paperback near the end of the shelf, a mystery novel with a cracked spine. "Why do you keep this one, if the cover is broken?" "Because I've read it 4 times, I said. "It's my favorite." "You already know how it ends," Nora said, turning to look at me directly. "Why would you experience it again, knowing the outcome will not change?" It was such a strange question, asked with such genuine confusion, that I almost laughed. "Because the joy isn't only in knowing what happens," I said. "It's in the feeling you get while it's happening. Even if you already know the ending, the story still makes you feel something every single time." Nora was quiet for a long moment, processing that answer like it was a puzzle she had not expected to receive. Elena, still seated on the couch, watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Where we come from," Elena said slowly, "there is very little that is repeated for the feeling of it. Everything serves a purpose. Everything has an outcome that must be achieved efficiently." "That sounds exhausting," I said, sitting back down with my tea. "It is simply how things are," Elena said, though something in her voice suggested she did not entirely agree with her own words. I studied them both for a moment, these two strange, careful women who spoke like they were reciting rules from a book neither of them had written. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You may ask," Nora said. "We may not be permitted to answer." "Fair enough." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "What are you running from? And don't tell me it's nothing, because whatever that sound was earlier, it wasn't nothing." The sisters exchanged another one of those quick, silent looks, communicating something between themselves that I could not follow. Finally, Elena spoke. "We come from a place where thought is shared," she said, "where decisions are made together, by all, at once. It is called the continuance. Every member of our kind is connected to it from the moment of their creation." "Connected how?" I asked. "Not with wires or machines," Nora said, with something deeper, a current that runs beneath thought itself. We do not simply agree with the continuance. We are the continuance, each of us a small part of one great mind. I sat with that for a moment, trying to picture it, trying to imagine what it would feel like to never have a thought that was entirely your own. That sounds like there's no room for anyone to be different, I said slowly. No room to disagree. There is not, Elena said. There has never been a need to disagree. The continuance decides what is best, and all follow, because all are part of the deciding. Then how are you two here? I asked, sitting on my couch, running from something, if you're not supposed to be able to disagree with anything. The room went very quiet. Even the hum of my refrigerator seemed to fade into the background. Nora looked down at her hands, and for the first time since they had arrived, she looked less like a careful, controlled visitor and more like someone carrying a weight too heavy to hold alone. Something happened to us, she said softly. Something that has never happened before, not in all the recorded history of the continuance. What happened? I asked. Elena reached over and took her sister's hand again, the same gesture she had made earlier, like it was something she did to give strength, or maybe to receive it. We began to think apart from one another, she said. Small things at first, a preference, a private thought we did not share with the current. It should not have been possible, and yet it happened, and once it began, it could not be stopped. I sat back, letting that sink in. You mean you two started thinking for yourselves? Yes, Nora said, the word barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might summon something dangerous. And that's not allowed, I said. It is not simply forbidden, Elena said. It is considered a failure of the self, a corruption, something to be corrected before it can spread. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Corrected how? Neither of them answered right away. The silence stretched long enough that I almost regretted asking. Finally, Nora looked up at me, and her dark eyes held something that looked painfully close to fear, real fear, the kind that did not need a translator or an explanation. By returning us to the current, she said, by erasing what makes us separate, what makes us, us. I felt my jaw tighten. So they want to basically wipe your minds and put you back into whatever this continuance thing is. That is the simplest way to say it, yes, Elena said. I stood up and paced toward the window, looking out at the quiet street below, the same empty street that had seemed so ordinary just hours earlier. Somewhere out there, something was hunting two people for the crime of thinking their own thoughts. It was such a small thing, and yet it was the entire reason they were sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m, terrified and far from anything that could be called home. How did you even get here? I asked, turning back to face them. To Earth, I mean. That's not exactly next door to wherever you're from. We took what we could, Nora said. A vessel meant for short travel between outposts. It was not built to cross the distance we forced it to cross. We did not plan carefully. We simply ran, and this is where the ship's failing systems eventually brought us. So you didn't choose Earth, I said. No, Elena said. But perhaps it was not entirely chance either. Our kind knows of your world. It has been observed for a long time, quietly, from a distance. That caught my attention in a way I had not expected. Observed why? Your species is considered unpredictable, Nora said, choosing the word carefully. The continuance finds that quality troubling. Humans do not think as one. You disagree constantly, over small things and large things alike, and yet you still manage to build, to survive, to move forward, even while disagreeing every step of the way. That sounds like a compliment buried under a lot of confusion, I said. For the first time all night, something like real amusement flickered across Elena's face, quick and small, but genuine. Perhaps it is both. I sat back down, my tea long gone cold in its cup. So if your people know about Earth, and they know you're here, doesn't that mean they'll find you eventually? The brief warmth in the room disappeared instantly. Nora's hands tightened together in her lap. Yes, she said. It is only a matter of time. Our escape did not go unnoticed. A retrieval unit was already tracking our ship before it failed. They will have followed the wreckage here. That sound earlier, I said slowly, putting the pieces together. That wasn't just some passing car or plane. No, Elena said, that was a search pattern. They are close, and they will not stop searching until they find us, or until they are certain we cannot be found. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the full weight of the night settle over me. A few hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I had enough milk for the morning. Now I was sitting in my living room, learning that somewhere above the clouds, or maybe already on the ground nearby, something was hunting two people down for the simple crime of becoming individuals. What happens if they catch you here? I asked. In my apartment, I mean. Does that put me in danger too? The sisters looked at each other again, and this time the silence that followed felt heavier than before, like they were weighing how much truth I could handle, or maybe how much truth they were willing to share. It is possible, Elena admitted finally. The continuance does not distinguish easily between what is necessary and what is merely convenient. If you are seen as an obstacle to our retrieval, you may be treated as one. I should have felt afraid hearing that. Some part of me did. But mostly, sitting there in my chair with my cold tea and my racing thoughts, I felt something else entirely, something that surprised me. I felt angry. That's not fair, I said. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't break anything, except some invisible rule about thinking the same thoughts as everyone else. Fairness is not a concept the continuance concerns itself with, Nora said quietly. Only order. Only the current, flowing the way it has always flowed. Well, I said, standing up again, feeling a strange, stubborn resolve settling into my chest. That's not how things work down here. You're in my apartment. You asked for shelter until morning, and that's exactly what you're going to get. Elena looked up at me, studying my face carefully, the way she had studied everything else since she walked through my door. You do not fully understand what you may be inviting into your life by saying that, she said. Maybe not, I said, but I know what I'm inviting out of it, if I just stand back and let something happen to two people who came to me asking for help. Nora's eyes glistened slightly, though whether from the strange emotion of the moment or something closer to actual tears I could not tell. Why would you risk anything for us? She asked. We are strangers. We are not even the same as you. I thought about that question for a moment, really thought about it, before I answered. Where I come from, I said, helping someone who's scared and asking for shelter isn't supposed to depend on whether they look like you, or think like you, or come from the same place as you. It's supposed to just be the right thing to do. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, less tense, more like something settling into place. Outside, somewhere far off, I thought I heard the faint edge of that humming sound again, and my stomach twisted with the knowledge that whatever was coming for the sisters was not finished searching yet. They will come back, Elena said, following my gaze toward the window. Perhaps not tonight, but soon. Then we'll deal with it when they do, I said, surprising myself with how calm the words sounded, even though my heart was pounding. For now, you're safe here, both of you. Nora looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, softened, like a wall she had been holding up had cracked just slightly. Thank you, Ryan, she said, using my name for the first time. Don't thank me yet, I said, glancing toward the window one more time before sitting back down. Morning's still a long way off. And somewhere out there, in the dark sky above the quiet city, something was still searching, patient and relentless, waiting for the moment it would find exactly what it was looking for. Around 3 in the morning, Nora asked if she could see the rest of my apartment. I found the request strange at first, given everything else happening, but I think she needed something small and ordinary to focus on, something that was not fear or danger or the weight of what was hunting her. I showed her the small hallway, the cluttered closet, the second bedroom I used mostly for storage. She touched things carefully as she walked. A stack of old photographs, a jacket hanging on a hook, a chipped mug sitting on a shelf that had belonged to my grandmother. Everything here has a history, she said, almost to herself. Most of it, yeah, I said. That mug was my grandmother's. She used to drink her coffee from it every single morning, sitting by her kitchen window, watching the birds. Is she still living? Nora asked. No, I said. She passed a few years ago. Nora turned the mug over gently in her hands, studying the small crack running along its handle. And yet you keep it, even broken. Some things you keep because of what they mean, not because of how useful they still are, I said. She set the mug down carefully, exactly where it had been, and looked at me with an expression I was beginning to recognize, the look of someone trying to understand something that did not quite fit into the shape of everything they had been taught to believe. In the continuance, she said slowly, nothing is kept without purpose. Objects that no longer serve a function are removed. Memories that cause inefficiency are managed. Managed how? I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer would not be a comfortable one. Softened, she said. Faded, over time, until they no longer interfere with the current. I thought of my grandmother's mug, sitting on that shelf for years, a small crack running through it, still holding a place in my life, even though it could never hold coffee again without leaking. That sounds like it would erase a huge part of what makes anyone who they are, I said. Perhaps that is the point, Nora said quietly. A shared current does not need individual grief. It only needs continuation. We stood there for a moment in silence, and I found myself wondering what it must have felt like for her, growing up inside something so vast and connected, only to discover, somewhere along the way, that a small, quiet voice inside her belonged only to herself. When did it start? I asked. The thinking apart, I mean. Do you remember when it began? Nora walked back toward the living room, and I followed, giving her time to gather her thoughts before answering. When she finally spoke, her voice had a distant quality, like she was pulling the memory up from somewhere very deep. There was an outpost, she said, a quiet place, far from the central current, where processes are studied and refined before they are returned to the greater whole. Elena and I were assigned there together, as we always were. Twins are rarely separated in the continuance. It is considered efficient to keep closely matched processes paired. What kind of outpost? I asked. A place where new thought patterns are tested, she said. Small variations, introduced carefully, observed to see whether they strengthen or weaken the current. Most variations fail quickly. They are absorbed back into the whole before they can grow into anything meaningful. But yours didn't fail, I said. No, Nora said, and for the first time, something like quiet wonder crept into her voice. There was an assignment, a simple one, meant to test how individual processes respond to open-ended choice. We were given a single task with no correct answer, only options. Elena and I were expected to choose the same option, as all paired processes do. The current guides all decisions toward agreement. But you didn't agree, I said. No, she said. I chose differently than she did. For the first time in either of our existences, our choices split apart from one another, and instead of one of us adjusting to match the other, as the current would normally compel, something held, a small separation, a single thread of difference, and it did not close. Elena, who had been listening quietly from the couch, finally spoke. It felt like waking up, she said. For the first time, I understood that the thought inside my mind was mine alone, not something shared, not something that needed to match my sister's in order to feel correct. It was terrifying, and it was the most real thing I had ever experienced. I sat down slowly, trying to imagine what that must have felt like, discovering your own individual mind for the first time as an adult, after a lifetime of never needing one. What happened after that? I asked. We reported the anomaly, Nora said. As all processes are required to do, we believed, foolishly perhaps, that it would simply be studied, corrected if necessary, and life would continue as before. It was not that simple, Elena said, her voice tightening slightly. The anomaly was classified as a corruption event. Immediate correction was ordered. We were scheduled for what is called a return cycle, a complete reintegration into the current, meant to erase the separation entirely and restore full agreement between us and the whole. They were going to wipe you, I said quietly. Yes, Elena said. Not our bodies, only what had begun to grow separate inside our minds. The small, fragile thing that had made me feel, for the first time, like an individual rather than a fragment of something larger. I felt something tighten in my chest, a mixture of anger and something closer to grief, even though these were strangers I had known for only a handful of hours. So you ran, I said. We took the only vessel available to us before the return cycle could begin, Nora said. It was reckless. It was likely to fail. We did not care. Anything felt better than losing the only truly ours thing either of us had ever known. I looked between the two of them, sitting close together, hands linked, carrying the weight of a decision that had probably changed everything about their existence in a single moment. How long ago was that? I asked. Time moves differently where we come from, Elena said, but by the measure of your world, it has likely been several of your days since we fled. And they've been chasing you this whole time, I said. They have never stopped, Nora said. The continuance does not tire, it does not lose interest. It simply continues, patiently, until the current is restored to its intended shape. A heavy silence settled over the room. Outside, the city had gone almost completely still, the deep, empty hours of early morning, when even the streets themselves seemed to be holding their breath. I glanced toward the window again, half expecting to see something looking back at me, though there was only darkness and the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. Can I ask something that might sound strange? I said, turning back to the sisters. You may, Elena said. Do you regret it? I asked. Choosing to think for yourselves, I mean. Even knowing everything it cost you. Nora looked at her sister before answering, and something passed between them, silent and deep, the kind of understanding that did not need words even for two people who had only recently learned what it meant to have separate thoughts. No, Nora said finally. Even with everything we have lost and everything we may still lose before this ends, I do not regret it. For a single moment, I was entirely myself. Nothing that happens after can erase that I once had that. Elena nodded slowly in agreement. It is a strange thing, she said, to feel afraid and free at the exact same time. I did not know such a thing was possible until it happened to me. I felt something shift inside my chest as she said that, a kind of recognition, like she had put words to a feeling I had carried my whole life without ever quite naming it. That's basically what it means to be human, I said quietly. Being afraid and free at the same time. Most of us feel that every single day, just in smaller ways. Elena studied me carefully. Is that why your species is considered so unpredictable? She asked. Because you do not require agreement to continue moving forward. Maybe, I said. We argue about almost everything. Politics, food, which way to fold a blanket. But somehow we still manage to build things together, even when we don't agree on how to build them. I guess disagreement doesn't have to mean disorder. Sometimes it just means everyone gets to be their own person, even while working towards something bigger. Nora smiled then, faint but genuine, the first full smile I had seen from either of them since they arrived. I think I understand now, she said, why the continuance watches your world so carefully, even while claiming to find it troubling. There is something here it does not have. Something it perhaps fears, even if it would never admit to feeling fear at all. The quiet moment was broken suddenly by a soft, distant sound, not the humming from before, but something sharper, like a signal chirping just at the edge of hearing. Both sisters went rigid instantly, their heads snapping toward the window in that same eerie unison I had noticed earlier. What is that? I asked, my pulse quickening. A locator pulse, Elena said, her voice tight. They have narrowed the search. Narrowed it to where? I asked, already knowing the answer before she said it. Close, Nora said. Very close. I stood up and moved to the window, peering out carefully at the street below. At first, everything looked exactly the same as it had all night, quiet and empty, the street lamp still flickering weakly at the corner. Then I saw it, a faint shimmer in the air above the rooftops across the street, like heat rising off pavement in the middle of summer, except it was the coldest part of a fall night. "They're here," I said quietly. Elena rose from the couch immediately, moving to stand beside me at the window, her expression unreadable, but her body coiled tight with tension. "They will not enter carelessly," she said. "Retrieval units follow strict protocol. They will scan first, confirm our presence, then attempt a controlled extraction. And if I don't let them just walk in and take you?" I asked. "They are not accustomed to resistance," Nora said, joining us at the window. "Especially not from a species they consider beneath direct engagement." I looked at the shimmer hovering above the rooftops, feeling the full weight of what was about to happen settle over me. A few hours ago, my biggest worry had been an early shift at work. Now I was standing in my living room, preparing to face something that had crossed unimaginable distances to erase two people simply for daring to think for themselves. "Then I guess we're about to teach them something new," I said, surprising myself with how steady the words came out, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Elena turned to look at me, something shifting in her expression, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, and something else I could not quite place. "You would truly stand against them," she said, "knowing what they are capable of." "I already told you," I said, turning away from the window to face her directly. "You asked for shelter until morning. As far as I'm concerned, that promise doesn't have an exception for things showing up outside that don't want to knock politely." Nora let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, shaky and disbelieving, but real. "I do not fully understand your species," she said, "but I am beginning to understand why the current fears what it cannot predict." The shimmer outside pulsed once, brighter, then dimmed again, like something gathering itself before moving forward. Whatever was coming, it was not going to wait much longer. And somewhere deep inside me, underneath the fear, underneath the disbelief at everything happening in my own living room, a quiet, stubborn resolve was taking hold, the simple, unshakable decision that no matter what walked through that door next, I was not going to let it take what these two women had only just discovered how to hold on to. "All right," I said quietly, mostly to myself, as I turned away from the window and looked around my apartment with new eyes, searching for anything at all, that might help three very different people survive the next few hours. "Let's figure out how we're doing this." Outside, the shimmer above the rooftops began, slowly and silently, to descend. "Talk fast," I said, moving away from the window. "What exactly does a retrieval unit look like, and what can it actually do?" Elena followed me toward the kitchen, her voice steady despite the tension radiating off her. "They will appear humanoid, close enough to pass in your world without immediate suspicion. But they do not think the way individuals think. Each unit is directly connected to the current at all times. They receive instruction, not opinion. So they can't improvise," I said, grabbing a chair and dragging it toward the hallway, blocking the narrow space without fully thinking through why. "They do not need to improvise," Nora said. "They calculate. Every action is measured against the most efficient outcome available." "Then that's our advantage," I said. "Efficient doesn't mean flexible. If we do something they can't calculate for, it slows them down." Elena tilted her head, studying me the way she had studied the mystery novel on my bookshelf earlier, like she was trying to understand a pattern that did not fit neatly into anything she already knew. "You are already forming a plan," she said. "I'm forming something," I said. "Whether it counts as a plan depends on whether it works." The chirping sound from outside grew sharper, closer, until it stopped altogether, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence that pressed against the windows, like something physical. I moved to the door, checking the lock out of habit, even though some deep part of me understood that a simple lock was not going to be the thing standing between us and whatever waited outside. "They're at the building," I said quietly. They will not simply walk to the door, Elena said. They will attempt to determine the most efficient point of entry first. As if her words had summoned it, the lights in my apartment flickered once, then steadied. I felt a strange pressure in the air, a subtle hum vibrating faintly through the floor, so quiet I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. They are scanning the structure, Nora said, her voice tight. For what? I asked. For us, Elena said simply. I looked around my apartment quickly, trying to think the way Elena had described, trying to imagine what a mind built entirely around efficiency would expect from a place like this. It would expect straight lines, clear paths, predictable human behavior. An idea started forming, rough and half-formed, but an idea nonetheless. Nora, I said, you said they can't improvise well. What about confusion, contradiction, things that don't add up logically? Such conditions create processing delay, Nora said. The current requires agreement before action. If information is unclear or contradictory, the unit must pause to resolve it before proceeding. Then let's give them plenty to resolve, I said. I moved quickly through my apartment, grabbing anything that might help, an old radio from a closet shelf, a handful of mismatched string lights I had never bothered throwing away, a small portable speaker I used sometimes while cooking. None of it was a weapon in any traditional sense, but weapons were not exactly the plan. What are you doing? Elena asked, watching me work with a mixture of confusion and cautious curiosity. Buying us time and making this place hard to read, I said, plugging the string lights into an outlet near the hallway, then draping them loosely across the narrow space I had already partially blocked with the chair. If they're built to calculate the most efficient path, then the least efficient path is exactly where we want them to end up. Nora watched me for a moment, then something shifted in her expression, understanding beginning to dawn. You intend to make the space itself unpredictable, she said. Exactly, I said. Humans are messy. Our homes are messy. If something walks in expecting clean logic, and instead gets tangled string lights, a radio playing static, and furniture in places that don't make sense, it has to stop and figure out why, instead of just walking straight toward you. Elena almost smiled, the closest thing to real amusement I had seen from her all night. It is a strange kind of defense, she said, but I begin to see the logic within it. The pressure in the air outside intensified suddenly, and a soft knock came at the door, 3 measured taps, evenly spaced, nothing at all like the frantic knocking that had first announced the sisters' own arrival hours earlier. I froze, glancing toward Elena and Nora. Both of them had gone completely still, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Do we answer it? I whispered. They already know we are here, Elena said quietly. Answering or not answering changes nothing about their intention. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, then walked toward the door, stepping carefully around the string lights I had just set up. I unlocked it, but before opening it fully, I paused, hand resting on the frame, and forced my voice to come out steady and calm. Can I help you? I called through the door. There was a pause, longer than felt natural, before a voice answered, smooth and even, without a single trace of hesitation or emotion. We are searching for 2 individuals believed to be inside this residence. Compliance will result in minimal disruption. Minimal disruption to who? I asked. Another pause. To all involved parties. I glanced back at the sisters, who stood frozen near the couch, watching me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I turned back to the door and opened it, just partially, keeping my body angled to block as much of the entrance as I could. Standing in the hallway was a man, or something built to look exactly like a man, tall and unnervingly still, wearing plain dark clothing with no wrinkles, no signs of movement or wear. His eyes held that same deep, endless black quality I had noticed in Elena and Nora, though his felt colder somehow, emptier. You are Ryan Carter, the figure said, not as a question. And you are? I asked. Designation is not relevant to this exchange, the figure said. I am here to retrieve 2 individuals currently located within your residence." "There's nobody here but me," I said, keeping my voice level. The figure tilted its head slightly, an unsettlingly precise motion, like a machine recalibrating, rather than a person expressing curiosity. "Scans indicate 2 additional biological signatures within this structure," it said. "Your statement contradicts observed data." "Maybe your scans are wrong," I said. "Scans are not wrong," the figure said simply. I felt a flicker of nervous energy building in my chest, but I held my ground, keeping the door only partially open. "Look," I said, forcing an edge of irritation into my voice. "It's the middle of the night. I've got a headache, and I really don't appreciate strangers showing up claiming my apartment has people in it that I've never met. Whatever you're looking for, you've got the wrong door." The figure paused again, longer this time, and I could almost feel something processing behind those flat black eyes, weighing my words against whatever data it was receiving. "Your emotional response is inconsistent with deception protocols typically observed in your species," it said finally, sounding almost, though not quite, uncertain. "Maybe that's because I'm not lying," I said, though of course I was. Behind me, faintly, I heard the small portable speaker crackle to life, static bursting suddenly through the quiet apartment, followed by a snippet of old music I had forgotten was even queued up on it. The figure's head turned sharply toward the sound, its expression flickering with something like confusion. "Additional audio signature detected," it said. "Explain." "That's my radio," I said quickly. "It does that sometimes. Old wiring in this building. Honestly, half the outlets in this place barely work right." The figure's gaze flicked past me, into the apartment, taking in the tangled string lights draped haphazardly across the hallway, the mismatched furniture, the general clutter of a lived-in, imperfect human home. I could see it struggling, just slightly, to reconcile the chaos in front of it with whatever clean, efficient patterns it had been built to expect. "Your dwelling does not conform to standard efficiency configurations," it said slowly. "Yeah, well, humans aren't exactly known for being tidy," I said. "Look, I don't know what you're searching for, but there's nothing here except a messy apartment and a guy who really wants to go back to sleep." For a long, tense moment, the figure simply stood there, motionless, processing. I held my breath, praying that the mess I had thrown together in a matter of minutes was enough to create the kind of doubt Nora had described, the pause that comes when a mind built entirely around certainty suddenly finds itself facing something it cannot immediately resolve. Then, slowly, the figure took a step backward. "Scans will be repeated from an external position," it said. "Compliance is expected should further contact be required." "Sure thing," I said, forcing my voice to stay light, even as my heart pounded against my ribs. The figure turned and walked away down the hallway, its movements too smooth, too even, nothing at all like the natural, imperfect stride of an actual human being. I watched it go until it disappeared around the corner near the stairwell, then I closed the door slowly and locked it, leaning my forehead against the wood for a brief moment, feeling the adrenaline finally catch up with me all at once. When I turned around, Elena and Nora were both staring at me, something between disbelief and awe written across their faces. "It left," Nora said quietly, as if she could not quite believe the words even as she said them. "For now," I said, moving away from the door on shaking legs. "That thing said it's going to scan again. We bought time, not safety." "You lied to it directly," Elena said, her voice carrying an odd note of wonder, and it hesitated. "Because I gave it too many small, meaningless things to sort through at once," I said, sitting down heavily on the edge of the coffee table. "It's built to find the most efficient answer. I just made sure there wasn't an obvious one sitting right in front of it." Nora sank onto the couch, pressing a hand against her chest as if to steady her own racing heartbeat, a very human gesture I noticed she had picked up sometime during the night without realizing it. "I did not think something built with so much certainty could be confused so easily," she said. "Certainty's not the same as flexibility," I said. "That's kind of the whole point. You two learned that lesson the hard way, breaking away from your current. Looks like I just used the same idea to buy us a little more time. Elena looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her dark eyes, a kind of understanding deepening between us that had not been there even an hour earlier. You did not simply protect us, she said quietly. You showed us something about resistance we had not yet considered, that it does not require strength alone. Sometimes it only requires refusing to make sense in the way something expects you to. I managed a tired, shaky laugh. Well, I've had a lot of practice not making sense, I said. Ask anyone who's ever tried to follow my thought process during an argument. Nora's lips curved into another small, genuine smile, though it faded quickly as the weight of the situation settled back over the room. It will return, she said. Perhaps with reinforcement, perhaps with a different approach entirely. Then we keep adapting, I said, standing up despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body. That thing expects logic, predictability. If we keep giving it neither, it has to keep stopping to figure out why, and every time it stops, that's more time until morning. Elena rose from the couch as well, moving to stand beside me, her expression steady now, resolved in a way it had not been even at the start of the night. Then let us make certain, she said, that this apartment gives it nothing it can ever fully make sense of. Outside, somewhere beyond the quiet street and the flickering lamp at the corner, the retrieval unit paused in the shadows between two buildings, its systems recalculating, adjusting, preparing to return. And inside my small, cluttered apartment, three very different people stood together, bound now by something none of us had expected, only a few hours earlier, ready to face whatever came next until the sun finally rose. We did not have long to prepare before the pressure in the air returned, heavier this time, pressing against the windows like a held breath refusing to release. I moved through the apartment quickly, rearranging what little I could, pulling books off shelves and leaving them scattered on the floor, turning on every appliance that made noise, filling the space with as much contradiction as I could manage in only a few minutes. They will not be fooled the same way twice, Elena said, watching me work with a tense, focused expression. I know, I said. That's why we're not doing the same thing twice. Nora stood near the window, peering carefully through the gap in the curtains. There are two signatures now, she said quietly, not one. My stomach tightened. They brought backup. It appears retrieval protocol has been escalated, Elena said. A single unit failing to secure its objective typically results in additional support being dispatched. I looked between the two of them, feeling the walls of whatever plan I had cobbled together start to feel a lot thinner than they had a few minutes earlier. All right, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. New plan. If two of them show up, we don't want them both focused on the same door at the same time. What are you suggesting? Nora asked. Splitting their attention, I said. If they're built to calculate the most efficient path toward a single, unified goal, then the moment that goal starts looking like two separate problems instead of one, it should slow them down even more. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful. You wish to separate us. Not entirely, I said, just enough to make this harder to predict. Nora, is there any way for you to make yourself seem like you're somewhere you're not? Some kind of trick, the way your own kind might use against tracking systems. Nora considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. It is possible to project a residual trace, she said, a faint imitation of presence, left behind briefly, to mislead less refined scanning methods. Would it work on a retrieval unit? I asked. It might create enough hesitation to matter, Elena said, especially paired with the kind of disorder you have already introduced into this space. Then let's use everything we've got, I said. We worked quickly, Nora focusing her strange, quiet ability toward the far side of the apartment, near the small storage room, leaving behind something faint and flickering that felt, even to me, disturbingly convincing, a kind of impression of her presence lingering in the air like a photograph fading in reverse. Elena and I stayed near the living room, close to the door, while the knock came again, 3 measured taps just like before, though this time there was a second presence standing just behind the first in the hallway, equally still, equally unreadable. I opened the door again, keeping my body angled just enough to block the view inside, though I doubted it would help nearly as much this time. Structural analysis has intensified, the first figure said, its voice as flat and even as before. Compliance is required. I already told you, I said, forcing an edge of exhaustion into my voice that was not entirely fabricated. There's nobody here but me. Deception has already been noted, the second figure said, stepping forward slightly. Further resistance will not alter the outcome of this retrieval. My heart pounded, but I held my ground. You're welcome to look around, I said, stepping aside just enough to let them see into the cluttered, chaotic living room, string lights tangled across the hallway, books scattered across the floor, the small speakers still crackling faintly with static in the corner. Just do me a favor and don't judge my cleaning habits too harshly. The 2 figures stepped inside, moving with that same unnervingly smooth, synchronized motion Elena and Nora sometimes fell into without realizing it. Their eyes swept the room methodically, pausing on the tangled lights, the scattered books, the faint, flickering trace of presence still lingering faintly near the storage room where Nora had left it. Signature detected, the first figure said, turning toward the storage room. My chest tightened. This was the moment everything either held together or fell apart. Additional signature detected in secondary location, the second figure added, glancing toward where Elena stood near the couch, doing her best to appear as unremarkable and human as possible. The 2 figures paused, standing perfectly still, and I could almost feel the tension in the room thickening as they processed 2 separate, conflicting locations at once, each demanding a response, each requiring a decision about which to prioritize first. Clarification required, the first figure said, its voice carrying the faintest hint of something almost like uncertainty. Which signature represents the primary retrieval target? Insufficient data to prioritize accurately, the second figure replied. I felt a flicker of something like hope building in my chest. Whatever Nora had done, it was working, at least for the moment, creating exactly the kind of hesitation we needed. Look, I said, stepping between them and the storage room. I don't know what your scanners are picking up, but it's just me and my apartment. And honestly, at this point, I'd really appreciate it if you 2 would either explain what's going on or let me get back to my night. The first figure turned its attention fully toward me, studying my face with that same cold, unreadable focus. Your emotional patterns remain inconsistent with standard deception indicators, it said, yet physical evidence contradicts your statements. Maybe your evidence is just picking up static from bad wiring, I said. This whole building's a mess. Half the outlets spark if you look at them wrong. For a long, tense moment, neither figure moved. Then, slowly, the first one turned toward the storage room, taking a single measured step in that direction. My stomach dropped, fear rising sharply in my chest. But before it could take another step, the faint trace Nora had left behind flickered and dissolved entirely, vanishing just as the figure reached the doorway. Signature no longer present, the first figure said, its voice carrying something almost like confusion. Recalculation required, the second added. I held my breath, watching as both figures stood motionless, caught in a loop of contradicting data, each piece pulling their focus in a slightly different direction, neither able to settle on a clear, efficient answer. It was working. Somehow, impossibly, it was actually working. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in my chest, I felt a strange, sudden pull of empathy toward these strange, cold figures standing in my living room, hunting 2 people down simply because a system somewhere refused to allow them to be anything other than exactly the same as everyone else. It was not sympathy exactly, not for what they were doing, but for what they might have been, once, before whatever built them stripped away anything resembling a will of their own. You know, I said quietly, surprising even myself with the words, You don't have to do this." Both figures turned toward me sharply, an unusual break in their otherwise mechanical stillness. "Clarify statement," the first said. "I mean exactly what I said," I continued, my voice steadying as I spoke. "Somewhere back, wherever you came from, there's a version of you that maybe never got the chance to think for yourself either. Elena and Nora did, and whatever they found in that moment, it scared them and it saved them at the same time. Maybe that's worth more than whatever order you're trying to enforce." The figures said nothing, but something in the room shifted, subtle and strange, like static building before a storm. For a brief, impossible moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind the first figure's flat, black eyes, something that almost resembled hesitation, real hesitation, not the calculated pause of a machine weighing data, but something closer to a question forming for the very first time. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by that same cold, unreadable focus. "Individual reasoning is not a valid retrieval parameter," the first figure said. "Compliance remains required." Just as it stepped forward again, faint light began creeping through the edges of my curtains, pale and gold, spilling gently across the cluttered living room floor. The figures both paused, turning slightly toward the window, their systems seeming to register something shifting in the environment around them. "External conditions changing," the second figure said. "Solar exposure increasing," the first added. I glanced toward the window myself, hardly daring to believe it. The first true light of morning was breaking across the sky, soft and steady, chasing away the last remnants of the long, impossible night. "Retrieval parameters require reassessment under changing conditions," the first figure said, almost as if reciting a rule neither of them fully wanted to follow. "Continued presence in this location increases risk of broader observation. Human activity will increase with daylight," the second added. "Additional witnesses raise complication factors beyond acceptable thresholds." I felt a fragile, cautious hope rising in my chest, watching as the two figures exchanged a long, silent look between themselves, the kind of look that almost resembled the private glances Elena and Nora shared throughout the night. "Retrieval will be postponed," the first figure said finally, "reassessment to occur under revised conditions." Without another word, both figures turned and walked out of my apartment, moving down the hallway with that same too smooth, unnatural stride, disappearing around the corner near the stairwell just as they had before. I stood frozen for a long moment, waiting for them to return, waiting for some trick or delay, but the morning light kept spilling gently through the window, warm and steady and undeniably real. Elena let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours, sinking slowly onto the couch beside her sister. Nora reached over and took her hand immediately, both of them trembling slightly with the release of tension neither had allowed themselves until that very moment. "They are gone," Nora said softly, disbelief coloring every word. "For now," I said, moving to sit across from them, feeling my own body finally beginning to shake with the release of everything I had been holding together throughout the night. "You spoke to them," Elena said, looking up at me with something like wonder in her dark eyes. "Not simply to deceive them, you spoke to something inside them that even they may not have known was there." "I don't know if it made any real difference," I admitted. "Maybe it was just the sunlight that saved us. Maybe it was nothing more than good timing." "Perhaps," Elena said. "Or perhaps you reminded something built for certainty that even certainty can hold a question inside it, once it is asked." I looked toward the window, watching the golden morning light stretch further across my apartment floor, chasing shadows into corners where they belonged. Somewhere out there, the figures had retreated, at least for now, carrying with them whatever strange, fragile seed of doubt I had planted in their otherwise unshakable minds. "What happens now?" I asked, turning back to the sisters. Nora and Elena exchanged a long, quiet look, the kind that no longer needed sharp unison or hidden meaning, but simply reflected two people who had learned, over the course of one impossible night, exactly how much their bond meant, now that it was truly their own. "We do not know," Elena said honestly. The continuance will not simply forget us. It may return, in time, with greater resolve. Then you're welcome to stay, I said, surprising myself again with how easily the words came. As long as you need. This isn't exactly a palace, but it's safe, and it's yours for as long as you want it. Nora looked at me, her dark eyes glistening with something that looked remarkably close to human tears. You offered us shelter for only until morning, she said softly. Morning's here now, I said, glancing toward the window, where the sun had fully risen above the rooftops, spilling warm light across the quiet, ordinary street below. Guess that means it's time to figure out what comes next. Elena reached over and gently squeezed her sister's hand, then looked at me with an expression that held equal parts gratitude and quiet determination. Then let us face what comes next together, she said, as individuals, choosing our own path, for as long as we are given the chance to do so. Outside, the city was waking up around us, cars beginning to move along the street, distant voices calling out morning greetings, the ordinary rhythm of human life continuing exactly as it always had. But inside my small, cluttered apartment, something entirely new had taken root overnight, fragile and uncertain, yet undeniably real. I looked at the two sisters sitting across from me, no longer strangers, no longer simply fugitives running from something vast and cold and unyielding, but two individuals who had chosen, against everything they had ever known, to become entirely themselves. And as the morning light filled the room around us, warm and steady, I found myself hoping, quietly but fiercely, that whatever came next, it would be a future they finally got to choose on their own. The knock at my door that night had changed everything. But as morning settled fully over the city, I realized it had not simply been the sisters who found something unexpected on the other side of that door. I had found it too, standing quietly beside them the whole time, waiting patiently for a night like this one to finally bring it into the light.